Welcome to our podcast. Today we will be continuing our discussion on relationships. For those who are new and haven't seen or heard last week, we'll be doing our podcast over the type of Zoom call from now on while Jordan is visiting overseas for a few months. And so we're just going to restructure and carry on. And last week we were discussing relationships. We had a whole bunch of questions prepared for each other. We got to one of them. So after some thorough discussions, we've discussed how we should approach trying to speed up the process and reach a few more questions. So that's what we're going to try today. And yeah, since I did the question last time, Jordan, can you kick it off for us? Give us the first question for today, please.
All right, sure. I think I have a cool short question for you today. The first one is, I read about a lot about the honeymoon phase when I was reading about relationships, and there's a lot about understanding what the honeymoon phase is and what it does to a relationship. And it made me think a lot of people go into a relationship and then they love each other and it's this amazing thing, and then after a certain amount of time they're like, oh, this person's so annoying, why did I get with this person, they're not the person that I married. So my question to you is, how do you know that you're in the honeymoon phase? And then the next question would be, when you're now out of the honeymoon phase and all the reasons that you were with the person seem to not exist anymore, what are you supposed to do?
Okay, so I think there's two parts to the way I would answer this. The first would be try and avoid, not to avoid falling in love, but trying to avoid getting to the honeymoon phase before you know the person. Because if you're in the honeymoon phase, you are so full of emotions and you're blind to logic, right? And if you enter the honeymoon phase before you know the person for who they are, you're gonna want to make choices like lifelong commitment, and that's an inclination we have when we're in love, is to want to commit and promise ourselves to each other for the rest of eternity. And I think the danger comes in if making those promises before you know the person. So then after that, I would want to remind someone that love is supposed to be a choice and it's not supposed to be focused on the feeling. So the honeymoon phase is named that because it's the stage where you're overwhelmed with feelings. So how you would know you're in the honeymoon phase is if everything's perfect and the person doesn't have any issues. That's most likely how you'll identify everything's just great. But remember, life isn't perfect, nor is any relationship in life perfect. So if you think yours is perfect, I think you should know you're in the honeymoon phase. And if you get
Okay.
out of the honeymoon phase and you've now already, made promises and you're starting to realize, I don't feel the way I felt, I might regret some of the choices or the things I said, then I think, depending on how far you took that relationship within the honeymoon phase, being if you got married, then you need to stay committed, my friend. As a Christian, you need to stay committed because love is the choice. And I would try and advise people to make the choice of, being committed to someone before allowing yourself to fall in love with them. If you fall in love and you have the honeymoon phase before you've made that choice, you're in for a bumpy ride, because then you don't know who you're choosing to commit your life to. That answers your question.
Okay, I like that. I'm going to give a follow-up question then. Wait, before I do that, I have a nice definition that came across my path. If you find nothing annoying about them, then you're probably in the honeymoon phase. It's impossible to not be annoyed by anything. And a very interesting problem with the honeymoon phase is then you'll find things that you typically find annoying to be attractive in this person. So, typical example, a guy is very logical. A woman in that phase will be like, wow, he's so logical, I love it, he grounds me. But in reality, 1 year later, they're like, wow, he just doesn't listen to me, he's so logical, he doesn't affirm my feelings or anything. So that's a good way to be able to see is, do I find anything annoying? No. Danger stranger. Okay, next I'm gonna put that into another question, if you don't mind, is so in your honeymoon phase, you accept the person for who they are, like totally. It's like anything they do is perfectly fine. And then after the honeymoon phase, you realize this person isn't perfect and you're going to have to really make the decision to love them. But then the question becomes, should I accept this person? Should you accept your partner exactly as who they are? And how does that go together with telling your partner they should do things differently? Because it's a typical thing in a relationship to say, what should I do differently? How can I be better? Which means there's things that you can change. So how does that work? Should I accept my partner for who they are, or is there conditions there?
Okay, so good question. I think I would separate this into two categories and say there's a certain stage based on your relationship with the person where you should accept them and where you shouldn't accept them. Before you've committed yourself to being in a relationship with them, you don't have to accept every feature they have. That's the whole point of, I know what I'm looking for. If I'm looking for someone, let's make it very superficial, who's a blonde, right? So if they're not a blonde, I don't have to accept them to be my partner because they don't have what I'm looking for. And that's okay. It's not their fault, it's not my fault, nothing personal. It's what I'm looking for. They have their own thing that they're looking for. So yeah, I think you can't accept them, or you don't have to accept them because you haven't made any commitment to them. But as soon as you make a commitment to, for me, it's the relationship. Some other people, it's the marriage. I take the relationship much more serious, I think, than other people. And I see the gap between relationship and marriage quite smaller than the gap between friendship and relationship. So I would say, as soon as you've committed into a relationship with them, you are no longer a person who now can't accept anything of them, except if it's not aligning with the Christian value, something that you guys are as Christians trying to achieve. So obviously if they are sinning, you don't have to accept that sin of them, but you must accept them for all their nicks and crannies and maybe features of their personality that might annoy you, but you've committed yourself, so you have to accept them in that sense. Yeah.
Can you, I mean, I know I asked the question and I used the word accept, but how would you define acceptance in a relationship?
To accept, the same way I define accepting something in yourself. It might be something that you acknowledge bothers you, and you can acknowledge that, you can communicate with that, but it's not something that you are now allowed to kind of hold against them, or keep bringing up and say you're such a bad person because you have this feature within your being. That's not fair. So I think accepting means loving them for who they are and realizing they are not who you want them to be, and loving them nonetheless. Yeah. But
okay, so can you accept a feature about a person but also ask them to change it?
I think you're allowed to ask them to change. I think it's quite selfish, but sometimes, yes, you're allowed to be a little selfish. But I'd say, dependent on the feature, dependent the way you ask them, the way you bring it up, I think having a healthy conversation about it is very important, because otherwise you're going to let it annoy you for 10 years and then it's going to explode and they're not going to know what the hell's going on. So I think it's very to communicate that, but I don't think you're allowed to then expect, close to our previous conversation, expect them to change. They might disagree with you, they might not want to. If they want to, well, happy days. But if they don't want to, you can't force that on them. So I think it's fine to ask, but to expect it is a different thing.
See, it's weird because usually acceptance as a word, the way we understand it is, you can be like this and I'm fine with that. You don't need to change. So it's weird that, you can, as a concept, you can accept someone as who they are, but still say, hey, I'd like it if you changed. And it just seems like such contradicting concepts. yeah, I know you're a very messy person and I accept you as who you are, but I'd really like it if you cleaned up a bit more. Which seems reasonable, but it also seems paradoxical to accept people when people are expected to change who they are, they don't feel acceptance because it seems as though I need to change for you to be happy. And so marrying the two ideas of acceptance yet also requesting change is very strange to me.
Well, I think in a world where perfection existed, acceptance might not be a thing. But I think it kind of is an underlying thing that I need to accept that it isn't perfect. So some person might not be the perfect person, but I accept them for who they are, and who they are is enough. So maybe there's a threshold of what I won't accept, but you don't have to be perfect to be accepted. So that's kind of how I look at that.
Yeah, I hear you. I think really what it comes down to as well is the redefining of what acceptance means. It's kind of what I was getting in the way that most of us understand acceptance. Asking the person to change isn't possible because whenever you request change, people are saying, "Don't you accept me for who I am?" And it's like, no, I do. I understand that this is the person that you are, but for the sake of our relationship, can we do things a certain way? And then obviously you navigate it from there. But you need to redefine acceptance to be different from the traditional, what traditional people think. Yeah, that was the only kind of curious thing I wanted to get across.
All right.
But you go ahead.
My question. Thank you. So I'm going to say, as I mentioned, the phases between from friendship to relationship to marriage. So I have a particular view on how it should go, but I'd like to ask you, what would you say is the ideal timeline from going from a friendship to a relationship to a marriage, and why that kind of timeline?
I'm the wrong person to ask that question. And I'll tell you why. I've been in a relationship for 8 years as of a few days ago. So if you ask me, I'm going to tell you, be friends for a long time, and then get married quickly. Just because that worked out nicely for me. But if I had to answer the question and give you a definite timeline, I would say if you're friends with someone long enough, you understand the type of person that they are. You know who their parents are. You understand how they were brought up. So you can very accurately determine whether or not you are going to be compatible. I think in the way that I would define a relationship and how it's different from friendship, there's not much compatibility that you're going to discover that you haven't already discovered in a friendship. You're going to see in a friendship that you click and you get along emotionally. You're going to discover whether what you want in life is congruent in terms of your goals and the type of people that you are. I don't really see what a relationship offers that would be better than that in terms of determining compatibility, as opposed to a bit more intimacy, and perhaps it would facilitate discussions to say, I want to be with you for the rest of my life. So let's try and be a bit more intimate than friends, and see if this still works, in which case we get married. So I would say be friends for as long as you need to see genuine compatibility. Very short period of relationship or courtship, if you want to call it that, because you're trying to get married, and then get married as soon as possible. And it also determines how old you are. If I had a person that was 18 ask me this question, I would say be friends for at least until you're out of university and you have fully developed in your brain, and then make a decision then. If I speak to someone that's 25, 26 years old, I would say 1 year of friendship is reasonable to determine compatibility. Yeah, that's my answer.
All right, good answer. And what if you find yourself currently in a relationship and you haven't been friends with the person for very long? You guys just clicked off the bat and you just jumped into a relationship. What would your advice be to the person?
I would say you say jump into a relationship. What does that mean? You're going to have to define that for what does it mean to you?
Okay.
What does relationship mean?
It means based on the emotions you decided to get together. So you didn't know each other to the extent that you could have before deciding to get into a relationship. So by jumping, I just mean you maybe skipped a few steps that you should have taken to get to know each other, but the emotions were there, the emotions were good enough, the emotions led you to commit to a relationship before you had to get to know each other fully.
I would say you need to put your guard up a lot more in that situation, because you're not sure whether the desperation of wanting to be in a relationship is pushing you towards that relationship. And I think that is like a mini honeymoon phase that you can be in a relationship. You won't properly assess your compatibility with the person because all the emotions are already in the air and already flying, and there's tension. So it's a very tricky place to be, even though that's how most relationships start. But I would say you need to be very careful in that situation and almost take a step back from what you feel and think with your head and not only with your heart.
Okay. Yeah, I think I would mention there that the reason it's so tricky when you find yourself in that situation is you don't know if your love is for the feeling of being in love or for the feeling of that person being with you. So do you love the person? Do you love the love? And it's emotions. You don't really know where they always come from. So I'd say if you find yourself in that situation, it's the hardest thing to do, but taking a step back would be the best thing to do, whatever that could mean for your relationship.
But I was going to say, let's get practical. What does it mean to take a step back?
So obviously, if you guys are Christian, hopefully you're not being too intimate within your relationship. But if not, I would say stop being intimate, because as soon as there's all of the romance and all of the hormones and everything, you're not gonna think straight. So cut that out for a while and actually look at the person and not what they have to offer, and see yourself with that person. Project yourself into the future. I don't know. Spend time with them in a sense that you can replicate or try to replicate what it would be like in 20 years. After being married for 20 years, you guys are going to have to spend a lot of time together, and you're not always going to be romantic. And if you don't have that ability to distract yourself with romance, which most relationships are just constantly, if you don't have anything to do, well, might as well get busy. So I think the problem is you need to spend time with them without doing anything romantic and see how that feels. So that would be a practical step back for that kind of situation. But if you're a Christian and you're trying to really follow the God's plan, God's plan for your relationship, or what you should be in or what you should be doing, I think getting out of the relationship would be best, because if they're really meant for you, you'll end up back together. But I think being in a relationship already puts pressure on certain types of how you should be spending time with each other, how you should be acting around each other, and how people around you expect you to be around each other. So that forces you to take quicker steps within your personal relationship with each other than would have naturally occurred. So I think getting out of the relationship will take away that pressure. And also being in a relationship for some reason, okay, I know what the reason is, but for that reason, I'm not going to go into it, then causes a person to feel like there is certain boundaries they are now allowed to cross, which it shouldn't, which shouldn't be allowed. Yeah.
So how do I spend time with a person in a way to replicate compatibility without it being intimate? Because if you tell most people spend time together in a way to test your compatibility from a marriage perspective in the way that you described it, most people would move in together because that's exactly what marriage is. So I mean, is it really possible to replicate that in a, I want to say, in a clean context where you're not being intimate
Yeah.
and you're not moving in together? Is that, can you think, is that possible?
You see, people who think let's move in together, they are thinking in the wrong line. I'd say yes, there is many ways to do this. The first would be spend time with other people. So don't be just the two of you. That's the biggest mistake you can make, is isolate you from all of your friends. And when you spending time with your partner, it's just the two of you. And when you're not spending time with them, you're spending time with your friends. So it's partner and friends. It's never a whole group thing. So that's a very dangerous thing to do. And the second thing is go out and do stuff like hikes, play sport together out in public, where you can start seeing how they maybe handle the waiter, handle frustration. And these are all a lot of good practical dating tips as well. But I think spending time with them in that sense, out in public, out in the world, how you're going to be doing most of your life, then you can see them for who they are, because they won't be focused on projecting themselves towards you in a way they want to be seen. Because that's another thing, off topic. But remember, on first dates, a first date is like people sell themselves. That first coffee you go to is like, I need to make sure I put my best foot forward. They must like me,
Yeah.
and I must be the one to not like them. If anyone's not liking anyone, I'm not liking them, but I must be liked, that's for sure. So you can never really trust the
Yeah.
first date. It's because like it's reading the book's cover. You don't trust the cover of the book because it's not, you don't know what's inside. And that's the same thing if you're only spending one-on-one time for that first honeymoon phase of however long. That's the best foot they're putting forward, and even if there's a foot that slips behind, you won't see it because you're so in love with the feeling. So I'd say getting out and about with other people, you'll start seeing them act off of their guard, not projecting only towards you, but how they just would be out and about and with their own friends and family. And yeah, that's the practical way.
Yeah, I think the last point you touched on, I would particularly emphasize. I think seeing them around their friends and family is a big one. Seeing how they interact with your friends and how you interact with their friends is so important. Seeing the type of friends that they have. So yeah, those types of things I find particularly, you need to go through that before you spend too much alone time with them, because then you've completely isolated them from situations where they get to really be themselves and you get to see them being themselves. So that's good point. I like it. I have a question about something that you mentioned. All right, you mentioned love, and you had a very particular way of like describing it as a choice and not as a feeling. So I had a question here of saying, when can I say to my partner, I love you, and what should I mean by it? So at what point in the relationship is it appropriate to say that? Or can I say it in the friendship, since the friendship is so long? Should I say it in my speech when I'm telling the person that I want them to be in a relationship with me? At what point is it appropriate, and what should it mean?
So after you had your first fight, you'll say, the Lord says, love thy enemy, and therefore I love you. Most romantic way to say it the first time. No, I'm teasing. So I'd say the point at which you say it is when you have decided to commit to yourself. Obviously, love in itself, in a general sense, yes, love thy neighbor, love your parents, love your friends. That's a different kind of love. But I'm assuming you're asking about a romantic kind of love. So when you say that I love you in a romantic sense, I believe you should only say that when you have committed to, as you've earlier asked about the when you can accept them. So when you've committed to accepting them for who they are, no matter how they change, no matter what how it happens in the future, you accept them, and therefore you commit yourself to loving them for the rest of your life. And when you make that choice, that commitment in your heart, that's when you can say you love them. And that's what it should mean when you say it, in my opinion. I don't know about yours.
Well, if I could just go in on that opinion, you're basically saying all the feelings that you'll have or that you should have when you're saying and expressing to the person, I love you, are all the check marks for wanting to marry that person.
Yeah, I believe if you've said that you love someone in a romantic sense, you should already be ready to get married. You don't
Mm.
love a person you don't have the intention to get married, because then you don't love them. Then you're not committed to them. Then it's for what you can get out of them. And then you don't love them, you love the feeling and you love the relationship or whatever else. You don't love them. If you love them, you want to get married. That's what the word love is supposed to mean, in my opinion.
So I agree with you, but I know that it's not realistic. The way that we're speaking about this is very logical, and yes, 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 this is when you should say I love you.
Mm.
But let's be honest, most people will say I love you when they feel an overwhelming, you know, how can I even explain what love feels like? Everyone knows what it feels like, so I don't think I need to explain it. But it's that point where people want to say and want to express, listen here, I love you. And in that is like a release of that emotion to the other person. And it's also an exciting thing because there's a moment of tension there. You know, are they going to say it back? How will they receive it? So it's like this, almost want to say, a lot more beautiful and full of emotions than the way we describe it, where we're like, oh, when you've checked all the boxes and made the commitment and you've decided that this is the woman, and then you can say you love her. So I agree with you absolutely, but I don't know if I wonder if it's realistic to put that regulation on it. And will you be able to stop yourself in that moment when you really feel like you want to say you love that person, even though you know you haven't perhaps assessed the person reasonably enough? And that's, I think, the real challenge with defining it this way, is it goes against everything that we feel.
But that's the beauty of it. I think, yes, every emotion you have might drive you to say those words, but saying them before you should say them, before you've committed yourself to the person, is irresponsible. Is That's how I see it. Yes, you want to say it. That doesn't mean you should do it. There's a lot of things our flesh wants to do. Doesn't mean you should do it. And I think this is one of them. I think due to movies and series and music we listen to in today's age, the words "I love you" have been over romanticized, and it has no longer become a serious, meaningful statement, statement of commitment. It has now become a moment of romance and a moment of wow. And you'll say these words for that wow because you want to have that wow moment. If that's how little self control you have, you're being really irresponsible with those words. That's what I have to say about that.
Well, I agree very much with your answer. I'd put something with that, which is to also, you want to say I love you in that moment because from what you've seen from media and everything, that seems to be the only way to express that feeling. But I think you need to do a proper investigation in your own feelings and understand what it is that you're feeling. This overwhelming sense of something, is it really love? Or are you just really desiring their attention, really liking their attention, really liking their acceptance of you? And so there's a lot there, and I almost think it can be very valuable in a relationship if you're able to articulate that very well, because you could express it in a very beautiful way to say that, you know what, I really enjoy the time we spend together. That seems very shallow, but yeah, I could imagine that if I sat down and broke down my feelings of love in the early stages, I'd be able to articulate a lot better to the person what particularly I am feeling towards them. And hopefully that would come across as quite romantic, and then I wouldn't have to say I love them and make the whole commitment of love. But I think I have something else then interesting to go into, which most people, I suppose it's the follow-on. You know, we are expressing love as a commitment, when I think most people describe love as something metaphysical that you feel for the person, and it's just kind of something in the air, and we both know it's there, and people kind of know that you should still love the person even though things aren't going well, but people are not very ready to do that when they aren't feeling love. So the question then is, we all grow, we all grow, we all become different people over time. That's part of being human. Can I fall out of love? And if I can't, because it's a commitment that I made, what are most people trying to say when they say I've fallen out of love? And so that I can understand, if I feel like I've fallen out of love, what does that really mean has happened within me?
Okay, I'd explain that to be, you fell in love, you were intoxicated with the emotions, and you thought that is what love is. The world lied to you. You didn't understand it completely. You thought the honeymoon phase was what love is all about. And when the honeymoon phase ended, love seemed to end, and you think you have fallen out of love. So I think we need to draw a clear separation there. As, sorry to burst the bubble of those who don't know, the day will come when you are committed in a relationship or in a marriage, and the emotions won't be helping you to stay there, and you have to be committed. That's the whole point of commitment. That's what makes commitment so much more valuable, and is that it's not so easy, and I think someone who says the words, I have fallen out of love, I would question that they really knew what love really meant. And I don't think that means, I don't want to make the commitment anymore. I think you don't want to make that commitment anymore for many of the days of a marriage. But falling out of love, someone by that would mean that their emotions has gone away, which it was always going to, but they didn't know it is. And they were loving the feeling of being in love of some sort, and they were committed or married that feeling. And when that feeling ended, that marriage ended to them, because that's what they were in it for, and that's gone. So now why should they still be in it? So I think that's how I'd answer someone who says those words. Yeah, it's tough.
So it's a tough question to answer, because it could be one of two things. It could be that you didn't know what love was in the first place, or perhaps you did know what love was in the first place, but you're just mislabeling this new feeling that you have as a loss of love. But if you've defined love properly as a commitment, I don't see, a feeling should not affect that, because it's a commitment. Why should a feeling affect a commitment? So I think I agree with you there. Do you have any more questions, or?
Yeah, I have one last question for you.
Yes.
Where is the line in a relationship?
Between
what you can and cannot do in terms of intimacy.
I was gonna ask you this question. I have it written down. Ooh, but yeah, okay. I quite like that. That was good. I think we can end it there, unless there's anything else that you want to put up.
No, good. Thanks.
So,
good questions.
Very good questions. I really liked it. We can still answer a couple more, because we've gone quite long now, to the point where I think we should divide this. When you brought up intimacy, I think that it was different enough of a question that we can start a new video there.